Hello and welcome to The Art of Grief, a new series from the Completed Life podcast. Through conversations with artists, painters, writers, musicians, storytellers, and actors, we will hear how their art provides another language to express the range of emotions they experienced around their grief and their loss. As these artists share their personal journeys, we will hear how through their craft as artists, they and those they walked alongside were able to reflect back on memories of a life and its passing, while at the same time move forward and even create something new. In many cases, these artists also discovered that their unique creations, books, paintings, songs, gardens, plays, provided a path for them to connect with others as they illustrated and pointed towards a common human experience of loss and grief. Through their art, not only were they able to heal, but they were able to be a part of a healing process for others. My name is Lynn Barger-Elliott, and I am the executive producer of Completed Life Podcasts. Our guest artist today is Cynthia Clark, a mother, a writer, an executive coach, and a committed advocate for families and friends of those who have used medical assistance in dying. She lives in Calgary, Alberta, with her 2 children. In November of 2018, Cynthia and her husband learned that he had terminal brain cancer. After surgery and when the cancer stopped responding to chemotherapy, he shared with her that he wanted to, as he put it, quit while it's still fun. Just 10 months after that day she learned of the diagnosis, Cynthia found herself with 2 small children, navigating a planned death for her husband, using the recently legalized provision of a medical assistance in dying, commonly referred to as MAiD. Her husband was from South America. They had lived in many places, and so in order to lean on and to keep their global community informed, Cynthia decided, as she described it, to write her way through those months. After her husband's death, Cynthia wanted to find a way to continue to write through the many emotions she was experiencing. And so she co-authored a book, The Many Faces of MAiD: What to Expect When Someone You Know Chooses Medical Assistance in Dying. And when I say she co-authored, what I really mean is that this book includes the writing of 17 authors, or storytellers, as they are called. I'll ask her to say more about them in a minute. First, let me say welcome, Cynthia. I'm so glad you have joined us today, not only to talk about your book, but the process behind it. How 17 writers were able to tell their stories under one title. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
When asked about life and writing, one of my favorite authors, Annie Lamott, writes this in her book, Bird by Bird. If something inside of you is real, we will probably find it interesting, and it will be universal. So you must risk placing real emotion at the center of your work. Write straight into the emotional center of things. Write toward vulnerability. Tell the truth as you understand it. In structuring this book, you chose, in Lamott's words, to place real emotion at the center of your work, to write straight into the emotional center of things. And so, just to give our listeners a few examples, there are essays on feeling bereft, feeling empty, free, fulfilled, heartbroken, grateful, relieved, proud, and peaceful. Can you share the idea behind writing the book and how you came to structure it around emotions?
Sure, yeah. Because I had gotten so much benefit writing during my husband's illness, I sometimes wondered if other people might benefit as well from writing to process what they've been through. And I guess pair that going through something like MAiD, especially when it was quite new still in Canada. I think at the time it was 3 years old. There's not a lot of people you can talk to about what you're going through, or people you can reach out to kind of ask if this is normal, or to feel validated and feel less isolated or alone in this experience. And I think what we really wanted to do, as I met more people who had been through MAiD via organizations that were offering peer support after the fact, we kind of came to find this common thread that people felt quite alone, felt quite isolated, and didn't know how to relate to others in terms of the things that they'd felt along the way. There was always this conversation around it's quite a emotional roller coaster, and there's a lot of conflicting moments. I mean, you're helping someone you love to die, but you don't want them to die. So, you're helping them apply through this process, and you're hopeful that they'll be approved. And yet, them being approved means they're going to die and leave you, which most of the people I encountered don't want them to die. So, the distinct juxtaposition of some very contrasting emotions throughout the process really stood out, and as things that maybe needed to be validated for others. I think in any journey in life, feeling acknowledged, seen, validated is quite useful and important. And I think, another interesting thing about MAiD is that it's quite contentious in some places. Not everybody believes in it, especially when it was newer. And it occurred to us that there may be a lot of people who don't just feel alone because they don't know anyone going through it, but maybe they feel alone because they can't talk about it. Maybe they feel alone because they don't have a community around them that supports the idea. I mean, I was very well supported and still felt misunderstood or isolated in my grief.
Did you make a decision about which emotions to talk about, or did they just rise out of people's essays?
So we'd meet every about 6 to 8 weeks, and we would discuss 2 to 3 chapters as a group. And we'd sent some prompts for people to come prepared, sort of to think about, in this stage of your journey, what was the dominant emotion that comes to mind, and what were maybe some surprising emotions that you felt that you would be willing to write about and share. So as a group, nobody was asked specifically to write about or assigned a topic, but we could see, well, we want to try to cover off the breadth of experience or of things that one may feel. And it's quite hard to just write about this moment in time at that time, knowing that it's not supposed to be representative of your entire experience, but that's all you're sharing. You want to say, well, of course I wasn't only relieved, or of course I didn't only feel angry.
Yeah. And I suspect, and this is just guessing, that maybe some people not so much needed editing, but encouragement or permission to feel a certain way, or to say more about what they wanted to say. And is it okay?
Interestingly, That was not the case. I think the group conversations really helped to people to see that, there nothing anyone was saying was surprising or shocking or awful. I think there was actually a lot of relief amongst one another to hear people say the harder, less common emotions, or not less common, the emotions that are a little bit less socially acceptable to say, I felt angry at my dying loved one, or I felt resentful, or I felt relieved.
Mm-hmm.
In the planning, we discussed our stories and things that had happened. And some people knew each other better than others from having been in grief groups together or volunteering in similar organizations. But we never came together and shared our pieces, which in hindsight, if I were to do it again, I might consider
Right.
including that in part of the process.
So when they read the book, that was the first time they actually saw each other's
Yes.
work.
Yes.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
I said that you had 17 co-authors, which is true, but you also had a co-author, Carol Cram, who you helped edit or lead this process. Can you tell us just a little bit about her?
So Carol is more of an author than I am in the true spirit of the word. She's published some historical fiction she likes to write. And so Carol and I met online, and she brought a lot of skills to the table, like publishing, having actually written and published a couple of books, a lot of attention to detail, a lot of understanding of word count and size and length and transitions, and a lot of detail oriented things that I knew and still know very little about. And I kind of brought more connection to more people who have been through MAiD, for example, people who would maybe want to participate in the book, and an interest in working with other people to share parts of their story that would resonate with future caregivers of people going through MAiD. So we worked really, really well together. Had very complementary skills for this project. And we've yet to meet in person.
That's great.
We spent hundreds of
Someday.
hours
Yeah.
on the phone or in shared documents.
That's funny. That's a great story. Uh, my husband and I have done some work and research on emotions and discovered that there's different ways to think about them. One way is to think about emotions is that they're reactions, something happens and we react by feeling sad, happy, proud. We are, as this thinking goes, maybe somewhat powerless about what we feel. The emotions rise up and present themselves in our lives. Another approach is to think that we might construct emotions in our minds and our hearts, wherever emotions come from. There aren't always reactions, in other words, but we have a role in constructing them to help us make sense of what's happening in our lives or what's happening in the world. And in this theory, we have some ability to guide and to shape what we feel and how we move forward. Do you think some of the writers, some of the storytellers you spotlighted found through their own emotions that they could attempt to make sense of the world by constructing some of their emotions and building a way of feeling, shaping their feelings so that they could begin to move forward?
That might apply more to the after your loved one has died.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really just wrestling with this question about if your emotions come or if you construct them. I do think that the process of analyzing, maybe analyzing is a strong word, but to share it in a book, it needs a title. And so we sent out everyone, like this feelings wheel. And sometimes we would sit and Carol and I especially would read a piece and say, like, what title should we put this under? And does it matter? Once we had, the process of writing was the first aim, but then once we had these pieces and we're, compiling them into a book format, the aim became, how do we produce something that's most useful and validating for a future me or a future you sitting somewhere wanting to know, is what I'm feeling normal? Is what I'm feeling common? Am I a jerk? Or is this normal?
Yeah.
So sometimes the label we put on them was in an effort to put ourselves in the future and imagine, what does this person name? So for example, today I'm feeling very sad or angry. I think that, the label that we put on what we're feeling sends the person we're communicating to in one direction, but does it change what we're actually experiencing in our bodies? Not necessarily. It's just the title we've chosen to describe it as to another human and how they may interpret that. Does that?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Yeah. And I mean, your book is unique, period. But I think a strength of it is that it just puts all those emotions front and center. And, the stories are built around that, and it names the usual suspects, but then some other things that, like you said, some are socially, maybe you need permission to say out loud, or you're feeling it, whatever name you want to put on top of it. But um, at the back of the book, you have an index of emotions that were explored, and I counted 69 of them. Uh, were there any emotions that surprised you that one of your storytellers talked about, or any particular ones that have stayed with you, maybe as a comfort or as a challenge?
I have two answers for that, maybe three answers. So nothing surprised me. I think some people's willingness to really authentically share those emotions surprised me, but the fact that they felt them didn't. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Um, I think I learned and grew a lot through a couple of the perspectives that were shared. Specifically, actually, some of the more positive emotions. I think I related less to them at the time that we were writing the book. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I appreciated that we had people from different perspectives because it helped me grow as well. I could really relate. I'm a very straightforward, honest, direct individual, and I don't have a problem, saying I was angry and I was mad and I was in denial and talking about some of those challenging feelings. So I appreciated that other people were also willing to go there. But additionally, I appreciated some of the ones that were, lighter. So one of the Daves talks about love and acceptance and peace a lot. And I wasn't in a place when we were writing the book that I could relate very much to those feelings, but they really kind of made me think about, will I get to those feelings? Can I, going back to your question about, do you construct an emotion or do you feel it? Talking about hope, or I think it was Genevieve talks about being excited
Mm-hmm.
for
Yeah.
what's ahead for her. And I was really inspired. That's a hard thing for a widow to say, that I'm heartbroken and I've been through something terrible, but I guess since I'm here, I'm kind of excited to see what's ahead for me. So I felt, challenged and grateful for some of those people's perspectives that they were willing to share.
Yeah. And maybe there's some emotions that just rise up within us, and others that we can say, I'm going to build this one today and see if I can allow myself to feel excited, or, maybe it's both. Cynthia, is there a reflection or a story that you would want to share with our listeners today?
Yeah, so I think I would like to share one of the stories it's about being excited when their loved one was approved for MAiD. And I think what stands out to me about this piece is that it's something that is really hard to admit to feeling, but at the same time, it's really relatable. And all of the emotions are true almost universally for everyone at some point in time. But this one, I think everyone can relate to, and also feels maybe gratitude that someone was willing to say it out loud first.
Great. Thank you.
So this is a story about how the storyteller sometimes feels excited by the prospect of one day having time to do as they please. So even though we have approval for MAiD, he has yet to choose a date. As I sit through endless treatments, visits to emergency, infections, and other setbacks, I wonder about my future. What will my life be like? Will I be afraid to be alone in my house? How will I fill my time? Will I be a burden to our children? The reality is, barring some unforeseen event, I'm going to outlive my spouse, and there will be a life for me that is not being his caregiver. Sometimes I let my mind drift, imagining the tomorrows. I indulge in positive thoughts of a future alone after he's gone. Get excited for what might be, like a teenager moving away from home. My time will be my own again. I can make plans without the constant need to cancel them. Perhaps I could travel again. I could take on a volunteer position and actually commit to it. I imagine coffee with girlfriends, dinner dates, theater outings. The idea of tanning on a warm beach or relaxing with a soothing massage is enticing. Reading a whole book without interruption. Thinking about my future alone is exciting. I'm looking forward to being able to do things that I enjoy, have conversations that stimulate me and motivate me to get involved. Watching my husband deteriorate slowly is lonely, tiring, and overwhelming. Thinking about what I have to look forward to gives me the strength to carry on through this hell.
She depicts so many moments that I suspect most of us don't think about.
Yeah. And, a feeling that quickly follows something like that moment is guilt, because it's hard to let yourself acknowledge that feeling. And it's extra hard because the people that I've known that have been through MAiD haven't wanted their person to die. And allowing yourself a moment of feeling excited for afterwards is incredibly hard when you've barely come to terms with the fact that they're ill or dying.
Yeah.
And this was also interesting story because it highlights what we were talking about earlier, that it wouldn't have taken many changes to have called that story exhausted, or to have labeled that story, what was the last, there was a word that stood out there, overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it speaks to the experience that I went through was a lot like a ping pong ball inside an arcade machine. That these emotions were fleeting and momentary, and yet intense. That there's like this intense excitement for a minute in my brain as I'm imagining this, and then it's off to feeling overwhelmed and exhausted. And it's not like you have this 2 hour long bath in this one feeling for 2 weeks.
Right.
It's small chunks. And I think the book, the way we set it up, was hoping to kind of mimic and validate that it's all of the things all at once.
One of the words that you used, too, actually, that really caught my attention is when you named the emotion resigned in the reflection that you wrote about saying goodbye. And you filled that word, that emotion, with the meaning I hadn't anticipated, and just thinking about the unremarkable moments.
Yeah.
And are you okay if I read a few of your words?
Yeah, absolutely.
You are talking about saying goodbye, and you begin by writing, "It's strange and unnerving to know the date that someone is going to die." And you couldn't help but feel that it was your job to create a series of perfect moments and a full bucket list of activities. And you wanted to be the fun mom and have this, knowing that your days are numbered with your husband, to make sure that they're perfect in every way, and that you realized at some point, I hope early enough to be forgiving, that that was unrealistic, and contrived is the word that you use, to have created those expectations. And you realized that even though maybe you wanted to create those moments, that you were just overwhelmed with what was happening daily, not planning outside of what was happening day to day within your home and within your family, and just beginning to imagine life as a widow, and having 2 children who had experienced the death of their father. I was really moved. I think a scene that will stay with me forever is the night before your husband died. You wrote that you ordered takeout and stayed up late as a family to read a book. And in some ways, just how unremarkable that was that comforting or unsettling?
Both.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm actually really glad you brought this up. So, if you don't mind, I'm just going to continue reading one piece.
Sure.
Because I think it answers the question. When I finally made it to bed, he was already asleep. As I cuddled up to him, I noticed how unremarkable this moment felt. This was my last night as my husband's wife. Wasn't it supposed to feel more memorable, more special, more desperate, like the goodbye before his brain surgery had felt the previous year? The night before my husband's death, I lay next to his sick, weak body and realized that this should feel unremarkable. I didn't feel from him the desperate fear, the desire to stay, or the clinging of a man with goals and unfinished business that I'd felt 10 months earlier. He was sick, tired, anxious, resigned, and ready to die. I think that Hollywood has done us no favors in the way that death is portrayed, especially medically assisted death, because it's true. It paints this, or it's not just Hollywood, but I think in general there's this illusion that you can plan it and you can make it what you wish it to be, and you can choose your music, and much like a birth plan, I guess. You can just like romanticize this moment and plan it and make it amazing. That feels like what's on offer. And yes, to an extent, you can, but similar to a birth plan, and then it might just all go to shit, Then I think there's a lot of parallels that presents this opportunity to make a perfect death, when in reality, it's still death. I mean, and not just that it's still death, but like I said in my piece there, that husband was ready to die.
Yeah.
He wasn't dancing around a Christmas tree or buying me roses or turning on romantic music or making this the most memorable, remarkable, special moment of my life, which in some ways I think, where were you the day this happened? You remember the last night with your husband? Like, I mean, you want to create this memory, but the truth is you really are creating, falsifying, cultivating a moment that's not real, because the truth is they're tired and they're sick and they're weak and they're frail and they're done. And so you asked me, did it give me comfort, or did it, I can't remember the word you used, was it unsettling? And a bit of both. You crawl into bed and you feel this, like, it's underwhelming. But the comfort came in realizing if my husband had been clinging to me like he didn't want to die, I'd probably be wondering, well, then why is the doctor coming to help you die tomorrow? I mean, it's comforting to know, yep, he was ready. That's exactly what he wanted. I have no doubts about the choice and the timing. And so you can't have both. I think more conversations in our society about the realities of death would be better, because I think that you can have an intentional death that's still not beautiful or romantic or remarkable.
Yeah. Yeah, I wrote in the margins of my book around your story just how grateful I was that you were so bold to share that beautiful and painfully real moment. And even when you plan these things and you're prepared and you knew it was what he wanted, there was still just a profound emptiness, which, to your point, was the way it was supposed to be, in that he was ready. There was no more fight, or I think you used the word desperate. There's no desperation there. There's no more fight. He was ready. And you're never ready.
No, you plan it and you're prepared but you're not ready. And I think that's another interesting distinction, specifically with medically assisted death, that you will still grieve and you can plan for a death moment, but you can't escape grief and loss, and it's still death. There's no amount of bracing yourself that makes what comes next any easier.
Yeah, it's still a death. It's still a loss.
Yeah, you still wake up without a spouse. You still wake up without a father. You still go through all your days of adjusting to life before and after.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do in advance to make that less profound.
At the Completed Life Initiative, we believe that when we can embrace the idea that one day we will die, it's then that we really learn how to live, to create meaningful moments, to appreciate that we get to live this precious life and to share it with the people we love. In other words, our life and our death are intricately connected and give meaning to, they complete each other. Have you experienced this or seen moments of a completed life in the lives of your storytellers?
I have found that the connection I've made with the storytellers and other people who have experienced MAiD specifically, because that's the space that I spend a lot of time in. There is something real and authentic about them, less superficial, less focus on things that aren't as important. And I found a connection with them, and I think it is because we've witnessed death, we've facilitated death, we've processed a facilitated death. I see people prioritizing differently. I see people talking about the rest of their life differently. I see people embracing decisions, taking risks, being more open and authentic, more truthful, less shoulds and more musts.
That's nice.
And I think that must directly be related to the experience of walking someone home, as my friend Sig would say, and recognizing, yes, that life is short. I mean, there's problems and there's big problems.
Yeah. I heard a few echoes of what I would call completed life in the way that you reflected on the impact of your husband's death on your children. You wrote this: "My biggest fear was that losing their father would ruin my children, but it hasn't. The truth is that it has made us all more empathetic, compassionate, and open to the dichotomies in life." And you continue later by saying, "I'm grateful every day that they know it's okay to feel sad and happy at the same time, and that love is not finite." I thought that was a beautiful reflection on completed life.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I am very grateful for the experience that we've been through has taught us a lot. And my kids and I have spent a lot of time talking about how we can learn from what we've been through, how we can embrace what we've been through, and we can let it make us better people or worse people. But yes, specifically, I have a new partner now, and we've all learned a lot from each other. He has come into our lives and been open to learning about what we've been through and to know my late husband, my children's father. And he has really surprised me in this idea that he sometimes cries with us when we are upset. And I one day kind of asked him about it, and he said, "I just feel so awful that you guys had to go through that." And I think it's pretty great and amazing to be able to love us so much that he wishes we didn't go through the very thing that's the only reason we're all together
Yeah.
and the source of his love, right?
Yeah, it's beautiful.
It's really beautiful that my kids will cry sometimes missing their father, but then they'll say, but if daddy were still alive, we wouldn't have him. And I don't want to. If daddy were still alive, would we all just live together? And I think it's pretty awesome that they feel enough permission that they can truly love and accept this new guy as their living dad, but they can openly cry about and miss their dead dad. And they know, like, you don't have to choose, and that you
Yeah.
can be really happy that you have a second dad, and you can still really miss and talk about your dead dad. And we've learned a lot because that dichotomy, like, we are happy and we're sad. And I, at the last anniversary, was really, really upset that my kids don't have very many memories anymore
Mm,
of their
mhm.
dad. And I feel like there's no one left, not many people left to remember my husband with me because our
Yeah.
life has changed so much. And my partner, he said to me, well, why don't you tell me more about him so I can?
Oh, oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah, it is. And yeah, I guess
How rich.
we've learned a lot about that death can come with us and stay with us even when we're happy and moving on.
Yeah. And that seems like a healthy way. It's going to come with you, travel with you, no matter what. But to weave it into the fabric of your new life seems like a beautiful and rich way to carry on his memory and to be true about who each of you are. You know,
Yeah.
you and your children and your partner loves you because of what your husband's role in your life and what who he made you, how he shaped you in your earlier years. You know, you're that person now that your partner has fallen in love with.
Um, Lynn, I wanted to share a story with you, if I could, that is not on your question list.
Okay. Yes, I was going to ask you. Okay. Yes. That was my next question. Is there anything I haven't asked?
Well, just in the theme of sort of producing art as a way of processing grief or life and our experiences, a really interesting outcome of the book is that we've had a chance to do a couple of readings, and the experience has been, I'll almost say, a bit spiritual, coming together with people who I've not met, but produced this incredibly intimate and open piece of work together. So one time was for MAiD Family Support Society, who, by the way, is the beneficiary of the proceeds of this book. We had a retreat, and there were about 5 of us on the retreat that had written in the book. And so we kind of choreographed or curated a reading. So we each chose something like from a progressive chapter of the book. And we read it to our like fellow volunteers. It was so different to read our own words aloud and to hear, none of the words in the book were new for me. I'm intimately familiar, but to hear them read by their authors um, was so special and authentic.
Yeah.
It was very lovely. And you could almost feel the healing, not just in having written them, but in sharing them out loud and having them witnessed. We did it again with a different group of people. We did a book reading at a local bookstore here in Calgary. And 3 of us are from Calgary, and another person came in from elsewhere. And so 2 of us had met, and the other 2 hadn't met any of. And we met for dinner first and got to know each other in the flesh a little bit, and then went to this bookstore and did a reading. And again, it was just like this otherworldly a little bit to share your words, but also to hear your peers sharing theirs, and a real sense of like a support group. I think all of us cried, but all of us leaned on one another. It's really special.
I'm getting goosebumps just hearing this, and it strikes me that so much of this book was written, over Zoom and not in person, and that to come together and hear kind of an embodied word speaking throughout the room, I think would just be so powerful. And I think each of these stories are so strong and bold, and to hear the author, the storyteller, actually speaking those words, I think would be just very moving.
It makes me want to go out and find funding to produce an audiobook with each authentic, like, original voices. That's sort of both times I came away thinking, wow, imagine if we could just all read our own pieces. I mean, yeah, that's
Right.
my
And
wish in the world.
when you're the storyteller reading your own story, there's no one can do it the way you can, and no one will. You hear it differently when you know that person owns that story.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, for our listeners, how is it that one might purchase the Many Faces of MAiD?
The Many Faces of MAiD, we self-published, and it is available on Amazon in many countries. So Amazon is the best way to purchase the book right now. It would be extremely helpful to us that people request their libraries to stock it or request their local bookstores to carry it. But we are sort of a very small team of us trying to make sure the people who need the book have the book when they need it.
Wonderful. And can you remind us one more time about where the proceeds go?
So the proceeds from the book go to MAiD Family Support Society, which is a Canadian charitable organization that provides one-to-one peer support for anyone who's been touched by MAiD, who's going through MAiD with someone or has been through MAiD with someone that just wants to talk to someone else who's been there.
Great. Thank you. Well, Cynthia, this has just been profound for me, and I'm so grateful for your time and your willingness to share your story and to create a book process where other people are allowed to are enabled to share their stories. And I can only imagine just how meaningful that was for your storytellers to have that opportunity. And then the fact that that's continuing, where you're meeting in person and having the chance to actually hear these stories read aloud. I'm very grateful for your work.
It was really nice to speak with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Art of Grief. I'd also like to thank Jed Olbaum, the editor for this series. We invite you to join us next week as we continue this series of interviews with artists as they consider how their craft speaks to their grief. You can find other Completed Life podcasts, including Voices of the Completed Life, Gifts of the Completed Life, and Lexicon of Life and Death, on your favorite podcast platform, or visit our webpage, completedlife.org, and go to the Programs tab and scroll down. Thank you for joining us here at the Completed Life Initiative. We would love to hear from you. Please send us your reflections, comments, or your stories of the completed life by emailing us at info@completedlife.org.